Hi, I am Hatu and welcome to Asian Agribees podcast, bringing interviews and updates for the animal protein community throughout Asia from a trusted and dedicated provider of news, information, and market intelligence. Today, Arif Fahruddin is speaking to Matthew Clark about barley as an alternative ingredient for animal feed. Mr. Clark is Managing Director of FeedGuys Resources, a consulting firm and IT solutions provider for the animal feed industry.
Matthew, in a webinar, you said that if you were a trader, you will be looking closely at barley. Regarding the price of corn in protected markets, you said barley could be very attractive. Please elaborate more.
Yeah, generally speaking, we look at the price of corn around Asia. Malaysia is trading around about $210 a ton, roughly delivered to producers. It's really very low cost, and our barley is going to be around about 10% lower than that. So the threshold price for barley is going to be about $170, $180 per ton, which is low. So barley is not going to come into the Malaysia market or any country that has unrestricted access to corn markets globally. Where barley starts to get interesting is where there are restrictions on the corn imports to benefit the farmers to maintain prices, and then barley comes into play. And if we go back maybe 2 months on the corn cycle, corn briefly peaked. I think the traders were interested in getting up stocks before national lockdowns took place, or before anticipating problems with supply logistics. That has settled down, and the price of corn has continued to drop. But now the inventories are up. It's stabilized, but with low inventories, it doesn't stabilize. When we look at countries like Thailand and Indonesia, they have protectionist policies in place.
Yeah.
They have artificial pricing of corn that raises the local corn price above the international price of barley. And generally speaking, barley, as I say, is not attractive except on a local basis. Barley is one of these crops. You grow local, you use local. But now it's coming onto the world market because of protectionist policies on corn. It's still being viewed with a bit of suspicion in Thailand. They're aware that barley imports are going to compete with the local corn price. Indonesia has got it under good control. So it's one of these things I think might happen and prosper this year, but maybe the politics within these protected economies might go against barley. I'm not sure, but it's certainly an attractive offer now.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah, certainly attractive. And it's worth about $270, $230, $240 per ton in Indonesia, something like that. So it's a good possibility.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
It seems that the use of barley as alternative feed ingredient in poultry and pig feed in Asia will depend more on the prices of corn and soybean meal. What do you think about this?
It's really determined by two things. The price of corn is certainly part of it, and then there's a major part. The second part is the price of fats.
Fats, energy,
Fat
right?
and energy. Yeah, barley is an energy ingredient, and its disadvantage in terms of its price potential is its energy level. Corn for poultry has got an energy level of about 3,200 kilocalories, around about there per kilo.
Mm-hmm.
Barley is about 2,700, 2,800. It's quite a bit lower. Now, if you can make up that energy with a relatively low-cost fat, then that makes barley more attractive. If the cost of fat is high, then barley is relatively less attractive. So that's the main dynamic of it. The barley amino acids are reasonable compared to corn, but it's all about the cost of energy, which includes fats. So the impact of soybean meal is on the pricing of barley is not that great, although there is some interaction because barley has a higher protein content than corn generally. Barley about 10.5%, corn about 7 to 7.5%. But it's not a major factor in the economic decision inside a formulation system.
I see. So what kind of low-cost fat that we can include?
Well, it depends on the country. The classic, of course, will be palm oil.
Indonesia has a lot, right?
Indonesia has a lot. Yes, that's right. So, one of the problems in making feed is that you've got to have a minimum quantity of feed ingredients. I know that sounds very obvious, but you've got to have about 25 to 30% of protein meals in your diet. But you have to then also find about 60% of something else. So Indonesia has a problem from time to time that the total volume of feed ingredients is not enough to make the tonnage of feed. So if in a crisis, we can work with lower energy feed ingredients like or DDGS is another good example. Barley, which is lower, and then add in relatively easily available fats to balance out the deficit in the energy of these alternative cereals. Of all the cereals, corn has the highest energy. So as soon as you swap to these other feed ingredients, the fat requirement in the diets will go up. Yeah. The other thing that people can do to compensate, but it's not common, is for the industry to say, okay, maybe we shouldn't be chasing the best possible feed conversion ratio. And if the industry redefines and says, okay, so 1.4 feed conversion ratio is very easy to sell to people. People like good numbers. But what if 1.5 FCR is more economic? Now, if that happens, then these alternative cereals with the lower energy become very much more attractive because the energy problem diminishes considerably. So we have to remember that today's chicken, unlike a broiler chicken 15 years ago, has got a tremendous appetite. And these birds eat. They're bred to eat. Previously, they were sensitive. If the energy in the diet went too low, they would lose their appetite. Now, they can consume lower energy feeds and prosper. So we can take advantage. We can take advantage of that with supplementing lower energy feed ingredients, of which barley is one.
Interesting. Okay, you touched already about some of nutritional contents of barley, like the energy level and also the protein. And at what percentage that this grain can be used for poultry feed? And do we need to add enzymes for the use of this grain?
Yes, you do. You do need to add enzymes. If we look back to the beginning of the feed enzyme industry, I think the early stages were all about barley. Barley has the beta-glucans, which cause sticky droppings, and had limited the use of barley in poultry in particular. So beta-glucanases deal with the beta-glucans and reduce the sticky droppings, increase the energy availability in the barley. So I would recommend to customers considering using barley to make sure they have an adequate stock of an effective beta-glucanase to enable the barley to be used. Now, how much do we use? That's going to vary a little between producers. I would anticipate it being more likely to be used in integrators rather than in commercial feeds. So there will be some segmentation as to who uses barley. The reason being, if you're an integrator, you can experiment and actually utilize lower energy feeds with a higher feed conversion, with your target for the farming enterprise in this case is cost of production, not FCR.
Yeah,
it's cost of production. So the integrators who own their own birds and the costings are internal have far more flexibility on being able to use barley. So if that's the case, 20% inclusion rate is quite likely. We see inclusion rates for wheat would be at least half of the cereal fraction of diets typically, and barley can take up a large proportion of that wheat segment inside the diet. The limiting factor is going to be the fiber level.
Fiber.
But barley is differentiated from wheat mainly because of the husk, and the barley hull does not separate easily. It doesn't separate during milling. It doesn't separate during harvesting. So fiber levels, I think, are about 4.55% in barley, higher. So that can be limiting. Makes it in some countries like Vietnam, for example, it would be a valuable feed ingredient because barley is just such a good ingredient to use in swine diets, particularly in swine breeder diets.
For pig feed, right?
Oh, for pig feed, yes. It's the cereal of choice, really, for pig feed, because the fiber level contributes so much to gut health. It's very good for the gestation sows in particular, where we're trying to manage good intestinal health and reduce constipation. But barley is a great high fiber alternative cereal to keep the sow comfortable in gestation.
Interesting.
So that is the interest, I think, in Vietnam. The other thing, what I remember about barley supply is whenever we get into a situation of problems with logistics, during the whole COVID-19 outbreak, the world transport actually has done rather well. You look at bulk freight, generally speaking, it's been functional, but freight and delivery on time has become an issue. So the canny producers are buying from alternative sources rather than relying on a single supply chain, like just buying Argentine corn, for example, which requires the ports in Argentina to be open all the time. They're looking at other origins and other transport methods to supply their cereal fraction, and it's diversifying the source. That in some cases the barley is a little bit more expensive relatively in terms of relative value to the corn, but it does give a little bit more flexibility on guaranteeing supply. So if one supply falls, the other, like container freight from a different country, can still work because it's an entirely different mechanism of supply. So that's another reason diversification of supply helps.
Matthew, I'm curious to know more about shadow pricing and value of barley under different conditions.
Now, if you're a nutritionist and say, I want to create exactly the same diet, and I'm going to consider barley. Barley is going to have a value, I'm from memory now, better check the slide, of about $170 per ton into a pig feed, okay, which is actually below its market value. If, on the other hand, the nutritionist said, okay, part of my response to the crisis on the grains is to change my specification, so I change my feeding system to a lower energy strategy, then the value of barley jumps up to maybe $220, $230 per ton. So it's sensitive to the skill of the nutritionist also. So, and this has happened before during the AI crisis, that suddenly we can't sell chicken because AI has broken in a country. And what we have to do then is to say we need to hold on to our chickens as long as possible by feeding low energy diets and slowing down the growth rate a little. Well, in fact, it's difficult to slow chickens down, but we tried. And the same situation has happened with COVID-19, that because of the restrictions on labor usage and manufacturing, a lot of chickens are being grown on the farms that are finding a lot of difficulty to reach the consumer. So this slowdown, lower cost production model is one that's attractive. So I would say to nutritionists, okay, look at your standard diets and then have another think. What happens if you lower the diet density and feed a little more? How does the relative value of barley, its economic attractiveness to you, change? And you can find there's a tipping point on barley. If you're going to drop down a couple of 100 kilocalories per kilo, which is okay for swine feeds, and use a lower cost, higher FCR strategy, your cost of production comes down, the feed cost comes down also. The pigs will eat a little more of a much cheaper feed, and you have got more diversity in your supply. So economically, in terms of supply chain management, you've got a more stable situation than relying on one source of supply, which I think is a bit of a problem nowadays, where we can't commit to industry functioning normally. It's better to diversify. So I think it's more complicated. The answer is more complicated than just evaluating in one diet. We have to be prepared in a crisis to break up our feeding paradigm, our business paradigm, in order to get by economically. If you do that, then barley becomes more attractive again. So does DDGS, by the way. So that can also become attractive.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Matthew.
Thank you for listening to another podcast by Asian Agribees. Don't forget to subscribe to this show on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcasts.